Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming to this panel, which is titled Innovation or Human Rights, Data Governance and Sandboxes for AI in Latin America and the Caribbean. The panel is the result of the merge of two proposals, one of them by Derechos Digitales and another by DataSphere Initiative. And I hope that during the discussion, we will be able, with this brilliant group of invitees, to navigate this hopefully false dichotomy between innovation and human rights. My name is Jamila Venturini. I'm co-executive director at Derechos Digitales, which is a Latin American civil society organization that works at the intersection precisely of human rights and technology. Our work includes research, advocacy, public campaigning, and also capacity building on these topics. And we have been dedicated in the last 4 years at least to understand how AI is being implemented and regulated in Latin America. We decided to dedicate efforts to that as we identified that the international discussions around AI didn't include much evidence or much information and contextual information about what happened in Latin America. So we have been developing different types of studies to contribute with more evidence on our context to try to reach standards that are useful for our context too. We have developed case studies and we are about to launch a document on regulatory sandboxes, which are a key part of our discussion today. And in the end of the conversation, I can share the website where you can find all this information. So going to our topic today, sandboxes are gaining ground in Latin American countries as a regulatory tool for artificial intelligence, with discussions for experimentation and normative advances ongoing in different countries such as Brazil, Chile, Colombia, and Mexico. While there are still questions about how to deploy them, they continue to advance in the region. As I said, we have an amazing group of panelists today to present their perspectives on the topic and to help us navigate and identify lessons learned and ideas to guide us and inspire our countries as they advance toward exploring these type of mechanisms. We will have 2 rounds of interventions, followed by your questions. So please take note of your questions so we can get back to them during the conversation. So I would like to start with Felipe. Felipe Moura is the founder and CEO of Vinci Ventures. Felipe holds a master's degree from the University of California, a bachelor degree in international relations from the University of Brasilia, and is currently pursuing an executive MBA at Fundação Dom Cabral. Felipe is a member of the Brazilian Institute of Governance, and he also serves as vice president of the Brazilian AI Association and president of FDC Angels. Please, Felipe, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And it's a great honor to be here. We have some guests online as well. So hi to all of you. It's 2 very interesting topics, and I like the way that you framed it. It's an apparent contradiction, but it's not, right? And that's something that we need to explore. Something that I always like to talk about in my when I'm first starting, especially on audiences that are not so accustomed to the whole discussion on AI, is a really good study from MIT. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with it. Raise your hands if you are. It's called the Moro Machine. Have you heard about it? You have? So the Moro Machine is started, I think, in 2014. I'm not sure. So it's probably at least 10 years old right now. They have formally published their results, but if you're curious, you can go on their website. It's translated to a bunch of different languages, including Portuguese, and you can do the test yourself. So it runs different scenarios of the trolley problem. So the trolley problem where, if you don't do anything, 5 people die, but if you pull a lever, then 1 person dies, but you get to feel responsible for that 1 person that died because you pulled the lever, right? or you let 5 people die. So either way, you're responsible. And so the Moral Machine study runs 40, I think 40 or more different scenarios, variations of that. So what if you have to choose between killing the passengers versus the pedestrians? What if you can choose between killing an elderly woman or a young child? What if it's a human versus a cat, and so on? So it's different scenarios. I don't recommend doing it on a full stomach. It's it's a very heavy kind of exercise. And what I do like about that, and thinking about the results, is that it shows clusters of data looking at preferences. So if you look at the Western side versus the Eastern side of the globe, there seems to be some clusters that would, and this is speaking in very broad terms, you would choose to save the elderly in one part of the world, you choose to save the younger ones in another part, the humans versus the animals, and so on. And so even as we try to think about what are, and we had an interesting discussion in one of the panels this morning, even if we try to think about what are the global things that we can think about and we can all agree on very basic, literal life and death situations, as a globe, we can't find common ground. But we can find common ground in the sense that there are priorities per region and there are things that we need to think about. And those are tough decisions, right? And so we as societies, we need to explore as collectives, what are the things that we want in scenario A or scenario B. And some companies have actually taken a step. And I'm not going to say the name of the company because I always confuse the two, but there's a German auto manufacturer that said, if you buy the autonomous car from me, you buy it knowing that we will always choose to save the passengers, the driver and the passengers. So if you buy their system, you acknowledge that it's on the terms of service, right? And we don't know what's the right answer. But I think the beauty of the sandboxes as a tool is that we get to find out, we get to experiment. Of course, hopefully not in life or death situations, right? But we get in understanding what is public interest, understanding what we want as a society, as a collective, and understanding what we are technically able to do, capable of doing, and how we want to possibly regulate what are our values, we can test hypotheses. And rather than simply saying, you know, this is what the Europeans are doing, and I want to import that for my country, or this is what the Americans are doing, or this is what the Chinese are doing. No. Let us sit down, right, and have a thought, an experiment. What is it that we actually want? And there's both a beauty and also a it's not risk, the word I'm looking for, but like a sense of unease, because at the end of the day, if you're looking for the easy way out, there isn't. We need to try it out. We need to actually sit and do the work. And that would be, I think, my opening part. And then we need to, and this is what I hope to accomplish this afternoon, right? In the hour and a half that we have, move at least a little bit to nudge us in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Felipe. This was very illustrative and a very good way to start. I guess it puts us two initial concepts as we discuss this topic. One of them has to do with the idea of ethics versus human rights, and ethics being something that has a lot of contextual, has a strong contextual element, while human rights are the standards that were already globally agreed and that we try to stand for. And the difficulties of working in an environment based on ethics, because they will vary culturally, they will vary within time, as you were saying, and we will have a lot of challenges there. And also the idea of the sandbox is one part of the idea, at least, as a possibility for us to experiment and to test some hypothesis. I guess I will leave it there the way you put it, because I guess others will touch on these ideas too from different perspectives, because I know that the idea of regulatory sandboxes and how it is being advanced for AI, at least in different regions of the world, is still pretty exploratory also, right? So part of this conversation is also touching on how do we better define those? How do we define the key objectives of those in a way that they can actually allow this learning process and this contextual process? I think this is very interesting. Well, I'll pass right now to Jonathan Mendoza. Jonathan is a doctor of law and master in general data protection regulation of the European Union. He's currently the Secretary of Personal Data Protection at INAI in Mexico, where he has worked on industry standards, government guidelines, and has promoted public-private collaboration. Jonathan, you have 7 minutes, and please feel free to do your intervention in English or in Spanish, slowly Spanish, so Brazilians can also follow up with you. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, buen día, buenas tardes. If it is possible, I change to Spanish. It's better for me. I try to talk slow. Dice Yuval Noah Harari que lo primero que tienes que saber en un sistema de inteligencia artificial es si estás hablando con un humano o con una inteligencia artificial. Ese debería ser el punto de partida. Me parece que los sandboxes regulatorios son una herramienta muy importante para poder definir cuáles son las prioridades legislativas que tiene que haber respecto al uso de tecnologías disruptivas. Hoy estamos hablando de inteligencia artificial generativa, pero ese es el trending topic, ¿no? Pero en 5 años quizá hablemos de computación cuántica, no lo sé, o de alguna otra tecnología. Hace 5 años hablábamos de Big Data. ¿Cómo tenemos que regular la tecnología? ¿Cuál es el mecanismo idóneo para hacerlo? Porque hay un boom a nivel latinoamericano y a nivel global en general por regular los temas de inteligencia artificial. En mi país, por lo menos hay alrededor de 30 iniciativas que tienen que ver con regular temas de inteligencia artificial. Están interviniendo todos los actores en el diseño y la elaboración de esta regulación o no, y cuáles son los efectos positivos o negativos que puede tener implementar una norma para la cual una sociedad no está preparada. Hablaban inicialmente en este panel de ver modelos que son funcionales en otras regiones o en otras latitudes e incorporarlas a sistemas jurídicos de nuestros países. Si quieren hablar de soberanía de datos, quizá podemos hablar de China como un punto de partida, o si quieren hablar de una norma que es fuerte en cuestiones de protección de datos personales, quizá hablaríamos del Reglamento General de Protección de Datos de la Unión Europea, del GDPR, pero eso funciona en otras jurisdicciones o no. ¿Cuáles son los mecanismos que tienen los gobiernos para poder adoptar este tipo de normas si no corresponden a sus cuestiones sociales, políticas, económicas, culturales? Por muy bueno que sea el estándar, si la norma no se adapta a la realidad de un país, pues está un poco destinada al fracaso. Es por eso que los open loop, los sandboxes son herramientas que son muy útiles y funcionales para identificar en un espacio seguro y que es temporal. Y por ahí hay una guía de orientación de la OCDE y ya hay una implementación en varios países, en Francia, en Reino Unido. Brasil tiene justamente un sandbox abierto para temas de consulta pública. Singapur lo hizo en inteligencia artificial generativa. Con estos resultados puedes tener un mapa o un panorama general de cómo está el tema en el país y entonces sobre eso quizá ir a mecanismos de soft law y posteriormente a regular, porque si regulas sin conocer el contexto, tienes un riesgo muy alto de equivocarte. Y si esa norma no es útil, entonces pues no sirve para los fines que está persiguiendo en realidad. O sea, él se vuelve letra muerta. Es algo que es muy difícil de lograr o de implementar. Existe el derecho positivo, se tiene que aplicar, pero su aplicación es de muy difícil concreción y entonces los responsables terminan en muchas ocasiones por no aplicar las normas, sino por ver algunos mecanismos alternos para poder solucionar el tema, porque la tecnología y la innovación no va a parar, no se va a detener, y menos por un tema de regulación. O sea, más bien, bajo una óptica de defensa de libertades y derechos fundamentales, cómo esas regulaciones pueden ser útiles para impulsar temas de economía digital, de comercio electrónico, y cómo el entorno o el ecosistema se vuelve positivo en todos los sentidos y no está un poco fracturado o, digamos, dividido, como podría suceder si no intervienen todos los actores en la elaboración de las normas. Hasta aquí me quedaría, Yamila, en mi primera intervención. Muchas gracias.
Excelente, Jonathan, muchas gracias y creo que nos traes otra reflexión o una reflexión complementaria. I'm sorry, I would change to English. I was just following the flow. I guess you bring an additional consideration about the idea of regulatory sandboxes, which has to do with innovation. And we have heard about tech innovation in a sense, and how do we test models within this controlled environment. And now we were hearing from you as part of the Data Protection Authority in Mexico, how these instruments can also assist on regulatory innovation. And I guess there is a question around what do we understand as innovation and what are the criteria or the limits under which we want to understand innovation in both ways. To what extent can we innovate at the legislative level or the normative level? And to what extent do we want to allow this tech innovation in a control setting? You were saying, hopefully we are not talking about life and death situations around innovation. What are other criteria we can think of if we think of these as instruments that are also grounded in human rights? I guess there are some very interesting insights for us to continue thinking about. Now I'd like to move to our online participant, Cici de la Peña. She has more than 20 years of experience working on public policy and regulation of digital technologies. She now advises the Mexican Congress as a founding member of the National Alliance for Artificial Intelligence, ANIA, and recently she co-authored the proposal for a national AI agenda. Currently, she serves as the International Affairs Director at the Mexican Academy for Cybersecurity and Law. Cici, I hope you can hear us. Please feel free to do your intervention in English or in Spanish, as you prefer. You have 7 minutes for this first intervention.
Thank you very much, Yamila, and thank you very much for the invitation. I think I'm also going to move to Spanish, if that's okay for all of you. And yeah, right, listening at my previous, and my colleagues with their previous interventions. Sorry, I said I was going to do it in Spanish, and I'm going to move now to Spanish. Escuchando a mis colegas con sus intervenciones previas, hablando de cuál es esta barrera entre ética, derechos humanos y estos marcos regulatorios que deben ser ajustados a lo que es el componente cultural, jurídico, social y legal de cada país. Coincido en que este mecanismo sandbox es una manera de innovar también en el componente regulatorio. Justamente ahora que tenemos la inteligencia artificial, sobre todo en el componente de tecnología, el componente regulatorio siempre ha sido ambiguo en el sentido de que los reguladores o los que están por lo general encargados de regular no siempre han sido definidos con esa visión per se, dado que las tecnologías van cambiando continuamente. Entonces, lo que sucede en esta coordinación institucional en el componente digital, dado que el componente digital es la sombrilla de todo lo que sucede en todos los otros sectores, ha tenido este entendimiento un poco con una velocidad más retrasada en cuanto a cómo se van a ir regulando los nuevos modelos de negocios o los nuevos emprendedurismo, el nuevo emprendedurismo que suceda. Y ahí entonces empieza una descoordinación institucional entre quienes deberían regular y quienes deberían tener una opinión también, como lo es la sociedad civil para proteger los derechos humanos, el regulador del sector per se, hablemos del regulador en el sector salud o en el sector energético, y el regulador y los reguladores que tienen que ver componentes específicos en el componente de tecnología. Y justamente esta complejidad institucional que puede presentarse en cada país y que desde el punto de vista de países en Latinoamérica no siempre es tan claro, eh, coincido con mi colega Jonathan en que copiar y pegar normativas o regulaciones es la receta para el peor desastre, porque justamente estas normas o estas regulaciones no se ajustan a los marcos legales y jurídicos de cada país. En ese sentido, creo que los sandbox regulatorios son también una nueva forma de entender o nos dan la oportunidad de entender cómo los diferentes actores tienen que ir tomando un rol específico en ese proceso de regulación. Y estoy hablando de la comunidad técnica, la academia, la sociedad civil y el sector privado y los actores del sector gobierno per se, los reguladores per se. Eh, este proceso de innovar Jonathan mencionaba cuál ha sido la experiencia de México y creo que México justamente se ha enfocado mucho, en los últimos 6 años se enfocó mucho a entregar el componente regulatorio al Congreso. Justamente creo que desde el gobierno federal, quien hace política pública, por ahí no quedó tan claro cómo la agenda en el componente digital iba a quedar implementada en materia regulatoria y mucho menos en una agenda de inteligencia artificial donde todo se exacerba y donde todas pues las acciones que hay que tener para cuidar pues para salvaguardar los riesgos a los que están enfrentados los usuarios, pues tendrían que estar atendidos. Y entonces en México esto se arrojó o se cayó sobre todo en el Congreso y Jonathan lo dice muy bien, más de 30 iniciativas con un componente de alguna u otra forma en materia de inteligencia artificial que no están coordinadas y muchas de ellas no están ni siquiera basadas en la suficiente evidencia científica. Entonces, volviendo a lo que es el sandbox regulatorio como un mecanismo innovador de participación de todos los actores involucrados, no solamente permite dar un proceso de prueba controlada para ver cómo funciona esta nueva tecnología en X o Y sector, sino que también otorga a los gobiernos una visión o una oportunidad de repensar cuál es esa coordinación institucional que debe suceder entre todos los actores involucrados al momento de regular, de acuerdo a las capacidades y a las oportunidades que tú tienes en tu país, sea culturales, normativas, legales, jurídicas y de enforcement también. Mucho de los fracasos de este proceso de copiar y pegar normativas de otras regiones para Latinoamérica es que en otras regiones se norma o se legisla, o se regula de X manera porque hay enforcement, pero en muchos de nuestros países no hay enforcement. Y con el riesgo que eso implica para los usuarios. Entonces, ahí quiero yo dejar mi intervención. Las ventajas de un mecanismo sandbox van mucho más allá de solamente implementar la regulación, sino todos los actores involucrados aprenden del proceso, van aprendiendo, van adentrándose más en el proceso de lo que es la tecnología con los derechos humanos y viceversa con la academia, pero también es un proceso de oportunidad para los gobiernos en aprender cómo esta coordinación institucional se va a ir dando en este componente tecnológico.
Thank you so much, Cici. This was an amazing intervention, I guess, because it allows us to go a bit deeper on how these instruments would look like. I like that you talked about participation, multi-stakeholder participation. You talked about shared learning processes, and you also talked about, or you leave us with the reflection about accountability and transparency also within those processes, right? So allowing us to go a bit further as we identify that our governments or several of our governments are seeing these as a key instrument, which I'm understanding that from your perspective it's an interesting step towards finding regulation that is contextualized, regulation that is evidence-based. But how do we actually design those instruments? It's a very important element, and I guess you bring us a lot of insight to continue on our discussion. I'll pass now to Lorraine Porciuncula. She is the Executive Director of the DataSphere Initiative. Prior to leading the DataSphere Initiative, she worked as OECD, the ATU, among other organizations. Lorraine is an affiliate to the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard University, where she conducts research on data for development. Please, Lorraine.
Thank you so much, Jamila. And it's a pleasure to be co-organizing this event with you today in CPDP Latam. It's very important to talk about sandboxes in a context of people that are working around data protection in the region. And before I go to talk to sandboxes, I want to talk about complexity and the insufficiency of institutional arrangements and legal arrangements that we have today. And the reason why complexity is important, also to do a callback to our name, the data sphere is a concept that we put forward to understand this as a new space of action, right? The data sphere is conceived of not only the sum of all the data that there's there, and some that includes not only personal data, but a lot of non-personal data. In terms of volume, the majority of data being created is by sensors, metadata. So there's a lot there in terms of data that is not personal, and the barriers that are very fuzzy in between. So data sets, but also norms, public and private legal norms, but also code as a norm in itself. And the third element is the notion of human groups in terms of the different public and private human groups. So within this troika of elements of data sets, norms, and human groups, we find ourselves in a new sphere of policy action, of economic action, of social interventions as well. And it's very complex. It goes beyond the fragmentation that we have within sectors and policy areas, and it makes it very hard for us to follow that from a regulatory perspective or policy perspective or social or civil society perspective as well. And observing all of that is important, and naming it as a new space is important as well, because it needs to make it clear for us that we need new tools. The way that our institutions have been developed, it's very much vertical. If you look into traditional sectors, be it finance or telecom, those are very defined entities that were regulated, and we could actually point them into the value chain and what services they were producing. And also in terms of borders, right? They had their services defined within a certain geography. And right now, it's a whole different world. And we don't have the tools and the institutions to respond to that. And there's a very established field already looking into complexity and complexity studies. And what is observed, and there's many different definitions. There's a long definition into what a complex adaptive system is. But typically, what you do is that you need to observe and adapt to that. It's very hard for you to model complexity. So that means that you can't really get linear approaches to how you respond to it. You need to be very flexible and adaptive. And that goes through the studies of certain molecules all the way to studying how birds move. So and now I've taken you to a journey around complexity. How do we respond to that in a world that, you know, the borders of different topics and services are so fuzzy? We need tools that are more agile. And this is where sandboxes come in. Sandboxes are clearly a word and a concept that has been put in a lot of different interventions. But what's interesting about them is that they differ from different innovation labs or different innovative spaces that have been already implemented within the public sector, because they are necessarily, as you said, they are temporarily bound. So you actually have a defined space where the experiment happens, and you always include the private sector in a way. So it's not only innovation for the purpose of the public sector innovating its own services, but you actually invite different stakeholders to that experiment. And what's interesting of sandboxes also is that you are observing something and iterating on it. Traditional ways of doing regulation, they rely on a very linear approach. You produce an input for a consultation and a study, and then you develop your first draft, you do consultation, you review that, you approve it, and the end, regulate and forget. What sandboxes and regulatory sandboxes in particular could allow is for a loop. The same way that we think about software development, when we think about versioning of that software, we could think about looking into our regulatory frameworks as well, in terms of loops and learning. And when we deal with the complexity and the speed and the velocity of how change is happening, we need new tools. Sandboxes can be that. But it's not all rosy either. We need to think about how to improve sandboxes in the way that it's actually being developed, particularly because we need this to be not only responsive to the different context, local, national, and regional, but also considering how we measure success, how we deal with failure, how we actually use this to coordinate between different stakeholders. Right now, what I see is a tendency also to somehow restrict the scope of sandboxes. It cannot only be about looking towards only one lenses. If you're looking into AI sandboxes, it can only be about one lenses about data protection. There's so many different dimensions related to AI that don't relate to personal data. How do we deal with that, right? It cannot only be through the lenses of either regulatory sandboxes in itself. The way we define it is that sandboxes can be in two archetypes, either regulatory or operational, and a hybrid of the two as well. And by operational, we mean data spaces or data lakes spaces where you're actually dealing with data in itself and operationalizing it. And there are a number of different sandboxes that are regulatory and that are not necessarily lifting regulation itself, right? And so there are a lot of preconceptions and assumptions within the world of sandboxes that need to be matured and developed. And that's work that we are doing now at the Datasphere Initiative. We have put and published a report in 2022, which was the first one to look into the role of sandboxes for data, and particularly the potential for cross-border sandboxes. And since then, we've been developing projects in a number of different spaces in the world, particularly in Africa, more and more countries in Latin America as well, and also in touch with many different countries in Asia and Europe, trying to understand what are those good practices, what are the spaces where more improvement needs to be done, and how can we actually be more structured about thinking about sandboxes and applying it for other sectors, and also ambitiously to think about how this could be a space to also propose a new type of international cooperation, because so many of those issues are not bound within countries. We need to be able to talk to each other and share good practices. I've already talked too much. I'm going to stop here and continue later. Thank you.
This was excellent. Thank you so much, Lorraine. I guess you also bring other elements for us to think of this instrument, for instance, the different types of different formats or different objectives they might have. And I guess something that comes to my mind for our Q&A in the end, it's, should we think of contextualizing sandboxes also as a tool for our particular institutional settings, institutional arrangements, as Cici was also mentioning? And how do we think of this complexity in terms of the different authorities that should or could be involved in these initiatives and how they will participate in the cases that we're seeing in the region? I will pass now to Lucia Camacho for her intervention. Lucia is my colleague at Derechos Digitales, where she is a policy coordinator. She is a lawyer specialized in public policy, and she has a master's in human rights. Lucia is the author of our paper that is to be published about sandboxes, and I hope she can even bring more insight into conversation right now. I'm sure she will be able to bring us even more ideas and questions for our conversation. Thank you, Lucia.
Thank you, Jamila. I'll continue in Spanish. I'm joining Cici and Jonathan. ¿De qué estamos hablando cuando hablamos de sandboxes y sandboxes regulatorios? Porque no sé si es una idea que todos tengamos clara. Varios elementos de esta figura han sido aportados por quienes están en este panel, ¿no? Una figura que permite a los reguladores aprender los problemas, ¿no? Los retos que traen consigo las innovaciones, particularmente las innovaciones tecnológicas, para aprender de ellas en la práctica y luego entender cómo regularlas, ¿no? Es como la definición al menos que aporta la academia, y luego cómo eso se pone en la práctica, ahí las aproximaciones varían según a quién le preguntemos, ¿no? En el estudio que hicimos en Derechos Digitales miramos particularmente la experiencia en América Latina, porque vemos que no hay una visión uniforme sobre esta figura que en la academia parece, digamos, haber mucha mayor claridad sobre qué es o al menos cómo funciona. En nuestra región, a propósito de las diversas estrategias para la inteligencia artificial en países como República Dominicana, Chile, Argentina, Perú, Colombia, Brasil, entre otros, se ha anunciado la adopción de esta figura como una entre tantas otras que está en la caja de herramientas de los reguladores y que los reguladores consideran va a ser la que permita responder a este reto que trae consigo particularmente la inteligencia artificial, en donde cualquier norma que se expida ya adolece de una suerte de, digamos, estrechez por la naturaleza misma de la tecnología. Luego, en nuestra región, particularmente hay dos experiencias que nos permiten entender cuán diverso puede ser el entendimiento de los sandboxes regulatorios en la práctica. Particularmente el caso colombiano y el de Brasil aportan, digamos, bastante a esta discusión. Sobre todo el de Colombia, mi país, es citado como un caso de éxito, que quizá merezca una visión mucho más crítica. La Autoridad de Protección de Datos en 2021 desplegó el sandbox de privacidad por diseño y por defecto aplicado a la inteligencia artificial. Y más o menos proponía lo siguiente: a todos los innovadores que tuviesen una inteligencia artificial, les invitaba a concurrir en un espacio de prueba supervisado por la autoridad para que la autoridad les dijese cómo aplicar el marco regulatorio vigente en caso de que hubiese dudas. La autoridad no prometía, como suele hacerlo la figura del sandbox regulatorio en la visión más académica, la autoridad no prometía excepciones regulatorias, que es lo que permite a las innovaciones tener esta suerte de espacio libre de juego y testeo sin la amenaza del regulador y eventuales sanciones. La autoridad colombiana no prometía nada de ese estilo. Lo que hacía era advertir, en cambio, juegue, testee, yo lo superviso, pero juegue con lo que hay, con la ley existente. Yo le asesoro. no le voy a prometer que no lo voy a sancionar en el futuro, puede que lo haga, ¿no? La asesoría que le voy a dar no es garantía de nada. Si se porta mal, con seguridad lo voy a investigar. Luego esa experiencia, cuando vemos los resultados, ¿no? Porque nos prometen los sandboxes, bueno, el regulador aprende, luego entiende cómo regular, ¿no? Todo bien. Luego, cuando analizamos críticamente los resultados de los sandboxes, los dos despliegues que hubo en 2022 y 2023, entendemos que los innovadores que acuden a este tipo de entornos de experimentación segura no tienen esa, digamos, no ponen en el fuego innovaciones que generen preguntas serias en materia de derechos humanos. La mayoría se trataba de de innovaciones en inteligencia artificial con chatbots para asesorar en marketing a consumidores para responder preguntas, ¿no? Y dar respuestas. Digamos, una innovación que no debería ser problemática, al menos no es el tipo de innovación que uno esperaría que acudiese a un sandbox. Y luego de 2023 deja de existir, deja de ponerse en prueba esta herramienta, no entendemos muy bien por qué, pero deja, digamos, abandona la autoridad de esta herramienta que puso en práctica y no entendemos luego cuáles fueron los aprendizajes de ese acompañamiento que nuevamente no prometía excepciones, simplemente le decía al innovador, aplique lo que hay, yo le digo qué hacer en caso de dudas. Una suerte como de compliance tercerizado en la propia autoridad, ¿no? Donde la asesoría la da el mismo regulador. Luego la experiencia de Brasil, que no se ha puesto en práctica, pero que promete cosas interesantes. La autoridad en Brasil dice, yo quiero testear mi propia regulación, particularmente donde hay vacíos, porque la Ley General de Protección de Datos desde luego no respondía en su momento, porque no podía hacerlo, a los retos que traería consigo la inteligencia artificial generativa, y decía la autoridad, o dice la autoridad en este documento de consulta que diseñó para poner en prueba los sandboxes, quiero testear el artículo 20, quiero ponerlo a prueba, el artículo 20 sobre transparencia. Transparencia, ver cómo entendemos esto de la explicabilidad en la IA, porque la ley nuestra no tiene nada en ese sentido. Luego, advierte nuevamente la autoridad, y esto quizás sea como una señal de cautela de las autoridades, advierte, no voy a dar tampoco excepciones, no voy a prometer que no voy a sancionar a quien pueda cometer un error en el entorno de prueba y fuera de él, luego cuando despliegue, ¿no? A los consumidores esa innovación tecnológica arriesgada. No voy a conceder excepciones, pero sí que voy a dar una asesoría, más o menos un enfoque parecido al de la autoridad en Colombia. Luego entonces uno queda reflexionando sobre cuál puede ser la promesa en la práctica de una herramienta que, al menos desde la visión académica, debería generar flexibilidades normativas y regulatorias, ¿no? Para permitir a las innovaciones, ¿no? Desplegarse en un entorno supervisado, controlado, temporal, pero sin la promesa de una eventual sanción para que los innovadores no se sientan amenazados, ¿no? Luego, esta aproximación cautelosa no es puramente exclusiva quizá del enfoque latinoamericano que parece estar emergiendo, sino también lo pudimos ver en experiencias en Europa que también pusimos bajo la lupa para entender si aquí también como en otras herramientas regulatorias hay una suerte de efecto Bruselas. Y también esta suerte de cautela donde no hay promesas arriesgadas por parte de las autoridades, pero las autoridades sí quieren entender qué está pasando, ¿no? Con tecnologías que no terminan de comprender del todo. Se comparte también en Europa, en la experiencia particularmente de Francia, que es donde ha habido sandboxes también en inteligencia artificial y protección de datos. Luego, solo para cerrar, dejaría como esta idea de hay una suerte de brecha entre lo que parece prometer esta figura y lo que en la práctica hemos visto, al menos de los despliegues, ¿no? Que tenemos en nuestra región, porque todos los demás países tienen promesas, ideas. El caso de Colombia y el de Brasil, que son los más avanzados, nos permiten entender que las autoridades quizá también tienen sus dudas. Quizá no las han manifestado tan claramente, pero sus aproximaciones más cautelosas, sin prometer ¿no? Excepciones en materia de derechos fundamentales particularmente. Yo creo que nos deja algo quizá para continuar la conversación ahora.
Thank you so much, Lucia. And I guess to see how this is already being implemented is very valuable as we continue to think of criteria, how this could be improved, what is the actual use of these types of mechanisms. I will start the next round of interventions. I imagine you have a lot of things to react to each other and to my own provocations during this conversation. I will leave some questions, some guiding questions that we prepared for the session, but you please feel free to react to one another or to identify a question that resemble with your thoughts and experience. The questions that we have prepared are the following. One is, what are the promises and advantages that regulatory experimentation with sandboxes bring to the discussion on data governance and AI governance for Latin America? What lessons or insights do the design or deployment of sandboxes for AI in the region offer, and what risks can they represent for the protection of individuals? How does the complexity element of AI impacts or complicates the regulatory oversight by a single national sandbox operation? And I guess several of the speakers touched that point on the institutional complexity and also the jurisdictional element that Lorraine mentioned, and it's very relevant here. And the last question, what sort of international collaboration could help us address key challenges and risks? Each of you have 5 minutes for their intervention, and I'll follow the same order of the first round. So please, Felipe.
I was hoping I would get to be first again. I was crazy. You know, I was dying to react to some of your points. I do have comments on your latest two questions, but before I get there, I want to build from where you stopped, if you'll allow me. But bear with me. I'm going to make a big turn, but I promise I'll get to my point at the end. So we have been humans for at least a few thousand years. I think we can all agree on that, right? So the first time we had a man-made existential threat for humankind was 80 years ago. There's an interesting movie about that. It's an Oscar-winning movie. In case you haven't seen it, I think they call it Oppenheimer. But nuclear science is also really great for humanity. So it brings us more precise archaeology. It brings us nuclear medicine. It brings the light and the energy that lights our cities. And we are all very excited about AI, right? So we want to get to work. We want to get to experiment. We have all these crazy good startups coming up. And I can say, because I am an investor to many of them, but I honestly don't envy the work of regulators. They're really overwhelmed. And it's a really ungrateful job because we don't remember when they do a good job and they, nothing happens as it's supposed to. But we do have a very long memory of when they make mistakes. So quick survey. Do you know anything about the Locomotive Acts from the 19th century? All right, it's one of my favorite examples. So in late 19th century, the British Parliament approved a couple of laws that they then, removed later on, that basically, in summary, created a scenario by which if you had any mechanized vehicle walking in the streets of, anywhere in the UK, you needed somebody to be walking in front of that vehicle, waving a red flag. And this was, the purpose of that was to alert pedestrians that a vehicle was coming, which, makes some sense, right? But in retrospect, it seems very silly. And this, of course, hampered the development of engines for at least 30 years because cars or locomotives or whatever, they couldn't go past 5 or 6 kilometers per hour because that's the, a decent walking pace for most people. And so when we look at regulation for something that is emerging, we need to think, is this going to be the next Locomotive Act, right? And my provocation here is there are two scenarios for AI regulation if we don't do sandboxes. The first is we don't regulate at all, and many people don't want that. And the other part is we have a locomotive act. But of course, we are only going to know that many years in the future. And the thing about this vis-a-vis locomotives and cars back in the late 19th century is that because the barrier of entry is so much lower, and the proof of that is the amount of startups that we see, the risk of falling behind is much, much higher. And the cost of falling behind, not just as a group of companies, as a group of individuals, but as a nation, as a society, it's much, much higher. So we are probably in the first time in the past thousands of years where with marginal effort compared to the last, especially last hundreds of years, with marginal effort, a nation can actually very quickly get ahead on the innovation, on the economic race. This is not just about creating code. Of course, there is a bunch of other myriad of things that go into that scenario, but it effectively is a much lower barrier than we've seen in the past. And of course, we're looking at many challenges that whatever sandboxes we come up with, because of course, if it isn't clear, I am a proponent of us doing sandboxes. We need to look at anything from technical security to privacy, to unemployment, to purpose, to addiction, to solitude, and all of the questions that not just economical, but as human beings, we need to face when we're looking at the boom of AI. And amidst of that, of course, we need to start thinking about data governance. We need to start thinking about upskilling, about reskilling. We need to start thinking about the right environment for flourishing of new businesses. We need to start thinking about investments. We need to start thinking about partnerships, because it's not just about the code, as I mentioned, but we need data centers. We need GPUs. We need clean electricity to make all of that happen, right? So even though the barrier is lower, there are still many things that we need to get right. And so my question, and this is to finish where I promised that I would be getting to your point, is where do we want Latin America to be in 20 years from now? And I think this is the time where we need to choose if we're going to have the locomotives with people waving red flags, or if we're going to have the flying cars of the Jetsons, right? And to go to your point, how much time do I have? I have no time. So let me stop here and I'll get back to it if we have time. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Felipe. I'll go immediately to Jonathan. I imagine you're also eager to speak.
Thank you, Yamila. ¿Quién en su sano juicio se va a acercar a una autoridad que posteriormente te va a sancionar con la información que le estás proporcionando? O sea, es ilógico. Esto tiene que ver con el perfil que tienen las autoridades, todas las autoridades, los funcionarios públicos, los gobiernos. Parecería que este tema de defender derechos no tiene que ver con dar una solución integral, sino con que haya consecuencias para quien lo hace mal, sin entender que muchos más potencialmente lo pueden estar haciendo mal y que esa autoridad ni siquiera tiene conocimiento de esa situación. Entonces, el perfil de las autoridades, por lo menos en materia de protección de datos personales, que es de lo que yo puedo hablar, porque un poco conozco más, no tiene que ser persecutorio o de ir hacia sancionar empresas, compañías, instituciones, porque cuando hacemos eso es que ya se transgredió un principio, ya no se respetó un deber, ya se violó un derecho. Esa es la parte coactiva, esa es la parte reactiva. Esa es la parte opuesta a los sandboxes, que son para planear. Y voy hacia ese tema. Me parece que es una buena herramienta para sentar a todos los actores en la mesa, en un espacio que no sea controlado por alguno de esos actores. Y esto es importante, porque generalmente alguno de los actores, por costumbre o por tradición, siempre el sector público o los gobiernos o las autoridades buscan liderar y en consecuencia de una u otra manera controlar las conversaciones. Es decir, yo te invito a mi casa para que me digas qué es lo que estás haciendo, te esté aquí, veamos los usos de la inteligencia artificial y si está mal, no te aseguro que no va a haber una consecuencia. Eso no es tener una silla en la mesa de conversación. Las autoridades están llegando o estamos llegando tarde a las conversaciones. Por eso todo el actuar que tiene que ver con nosotros es reactivo. No es en un esquema de gobernanza. Gobernanza de datos personales, gobernanza de la inteligencia artificial, gobernanza de la tecnología disruptiva que ustedes digan hacia adelante. Las normas siempre van a ser estáticas, siempre van a ir atrás de la innovación y la tecnología. Y la innovación y la tecnología no dejará de existir o de avanzar en función de la norma que se apruebe en el país que ustedes gusten y manden. O sea que si mañana hay una regulación de inteligencia artificial en Brasil, no es que van a dejar de desarrollar, ¿verdad? O ya no, o van a dejar de entrenar sistemas de inteligencia artificial o no va a haber desarrollo de algoritmo. No, como los legisladores, los actores relevantes, los tomadores de decisiones, se involucran en una conversación, en una situación que ya existe el día de hoy. ¿Cómo dejamos de generar una bola de nieve, que es un círculo no virtuoso, que es negativo, y formamos parte de las conversaciones desde una posición que no sea burocrática? Tenemos que entender con flexibilidad cuál es el rol que tienen que tener las autoridades en estas conversaciones. La protección de datos personales no puede ser una barrera, una obstrucción al tema de economía digital, o de comercio electrónico, ni al desarrollo global de esto. O sea, la inteligencia artificial va a sumar 15.7 billones de dólares para 2030. No va a parar por ninguna regulación. Los costos los van a asumir si es que hay una contingencia por no atender una norma. Creo que estamos en un momento importante en Latinoamérica para poder entender esto y cambiar el rol que tienen las instituciones y las autoridades. No lo ha dicho sí, seguramente ahorita lo va a decir, pero en México hicimos un ejercicio a través del Senado de la República y la senadora Alejandra Lagunes, que es una alianza nacional de inteligencia artificial, y de ahí derivó un sandbox justo con la embajada británica. A ver, nos tenemos que escuchar todos, no hay una sola persona que tenga digamos, la respuesta correcta y única. Por eso es multiactor, por eso es multidisciplinario, y generar esos espacios lo que nos va a permitir eventualmente es que el ecosistema sea más seguro, que dé mayores certezas hacia los usuarios y que los desequilibrios existentes al día de hoy entre servicios digitales y usuarios se vayan balanceando en función de las decisiones que se tomen responsablemente por todos los involucrados. ¿Qué se trata de hacer con la regulación? Y con eso concluyo. Como hay una simetría en Internet o en los ambientes digitales, se trata de balancear con la regulación esta asimetría, pero el problema no está ahí. El problema es cómo cambia esta conformación. Monetizar datos, disculpen ustedes, no está prohibido. Si hay una causa de legitimación de por medio, es posible hacerlo. El problema es que del otro lado no hay conocimiento, no hay autodeterminación informativa, no se ha socializado el derecho, no se ejerce, no se consolida una cultura. A la regulación tienen que ir aparejadas otras acciones, como política pública, como la implementación transversal en los gobiernos o en las instituciones. Hasta ahí me quedo ahora, Yamila, pero creo que vale la pena reflexionar en torno al papel que tiene que tener cada uno de los gobiernos en estos temas.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. We are getting short of time, so I'll go immediately to Ceci, so we have time for some questions from the audience.
Sí, muchas gracias. Y yo voy a retomar justamente de lo que decía Jonathan y sobre esta verticalidad que hablaba Lorraine acerca de cómo está esta estructura institucional en los países en Latinoamérica. Jonathan nos decía, siempre quiere haber en este contexto multiactor, que es lo que nos ofrecen los sandboxes, esta posibilidad de trabajar en un contexto multiactor, siempre habrá, por ejemplo, alguien que quiera controlar y por lo general el gobierno cree que el rol de ellos es tomar ese papel. Coincido mucho con lo que dice Jonathan, completamente esto debe ser en un componente multiactor. Y entonces, hablando específicamente, ya que Jonathan me dio oportunidad de hablar de este proceso de análisis de sandbox regulatorio que se hizo en México fue prácticamente explorar la viabilidad y ver si estábamos en la posibilidad de implementar un sandbox. Por lo que mencionaban mis colegas, si se entiende de la misma manera en todos los actores, si saben, primero saben o conocen qué es la figura del sandbox, si se podría implementar en un contexto de coordinación institucional, es decir, nosotros en este proceso de análisis para el apetito de implementar un sandbox reunimos a los principales reguladores en el contexto digital, el INAI, la COFESE, que es el regulador en materia de competencia, y el Instituto Federal de Telecomunicaciones, junto con la Autoridad de Protección de Datos, y el Senado. Y un caso interesante o dos resultados que yo quiero destacar de este análisis fue, primero, todos los participantes, incluyendo sociedad civil, academia y industria privada, coincidieron en que sí debería haber un sandbox regulatorio en México, pero no solamente para inteligencia artificial, sino para cualquier tecnología y en cualquier sector. Y eso daba entonces un poco la oportunidad de repensar o de conversar acerca de cómo esta coordinación de los reguladores debería darse. Los que regulan la normativa en materia de datos, en materia de competencia, en materia de telecomunicaciones, y después los reguladores sectoriales per se, el regulador sectorial en materia de energía, por ejemplo, o de educación, o de salud, ustedes nómbrenlo. Y en ese sentido, entonces, otra de las conclusiones de este proceso fue, sería ideal tener una especie de Digital Coordination Regulation Forum, un poco como para justamente atender la problemática o el reto que mencionaba Jonathan, de no tener un solo regulador, un solo ente que tomara el control de ese proceso regulatorio. Ya hay ejemplos como ejemplos de ese tipo de organización. Inglaterra, Canadá, Australia tienen organizaciones similares. Y uno de los retos que yo veo, sobre todo en países en América Latina, justamente, y vuelvo creo que a donde empecé mi intervención, es precisamente a esa complejidad institucional. Al final del proyecto, algo que fue muy interesante y yo estoy muy contenta con los resultados de ese proyecto, fue tener sentados a los 3 reguladores, incluyendo el Senado, a los 4 reguladores, como paralelos o como periféricos que deberían estar hablando de cómo apoyar el proceso regulatorio en procesos sandbox. Sin embargo, lo que sucede en México es un proceso, pues, igual que en muchos países de Latinoamérica, la falta de continuidad de políticas públicas y el cambio de la estructura gubernamental en cada cambio de gobierno complica mucho, pues, seguir implementando estos debates y estos diálogos y llevarlos a la práctica. Probablemente México ahora no sea la excepción. Esperemos que los cambios, el cambio en gobierno permita tener una continuidad en las propuestas que han surgido de estos diálogos. Pero ahí vuelvo entonces a la complejidad, no de implementar el proyecto o un mecanismo sandbox per se, sino la complejidad de la que hablaba Lorraine, de tener esta coordinación institucional que contempla esta complejidad de conversar en un ambiente multiactor para lograr resultados específicos. Y creo que ahí es donde yo enfocaría más las lecciones que hemos aprendido desde México. Si bien hay mucho apetito por el ecosistema digital para implementar un mecanismo sandbox como un mecanismo innovador de regulación en materia tecnológica, con lo que tenemos que enfrentarnos también es con esta complejidad en la verticalidad de la institucionalidad del gobierno. Y creo que esos son retos que deberíamos de tener, pues, un poco ya quizás más atendidos o solucionados, y que es por eso que no podemos copiar y pegar regulaciones de otras regiones donde a lo mejor esa complejidad institucional está un poco más resuelta. Creo que ahí yo dejaría mi intervención.
Thank you, Cici. And I'll pass immediately to Lorraine.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to build in several of those points. And to answer your first question on what are the promises, I want to bring back the first phrase of your intervention, Jonathan, which was, who in their sane mind as the private sector would come to a regulator and say, you know, exactly what their problems are. And it's interesting because we've been working very closely to the Singaporeans, and they have implemented so many times their sandbox that talking to the head of the regulator, IMDA, they told us that, listen, right now, it's the private sector, their compliance team, that comes to us to propose sandboxes. And for me, that answers the potential for sandboxes and what they can be. And for me, the key word is trust. I mean, that's a basic prisoner dilemmas theory. If you run one problem once, you have one result, which is easily the whole society loses out, right? There's no trust between the stakeholders. You need to run the same experiment several times for people to understand and to be able to anticipate what's going to be each other's behavior and build that trust. That's what, for me, the potential sandboxes are. And we need to be able to be intentional about this objective, right? And it's not just playing around with rules and you know, pretending that we're lifting this or leaving that. And we need to be intentional about, ultimately, we want to improve people's lives and make sure that we are saving our planet, right? And how do we do that? How are we able to build better relations between public and the private sector and all stakeholders affected? And Sandboxes is one of the tools. It's not the only one, but certainly is one that responds to complexity and responds to that need of actually be more iterative in the way that we are approaching this. And for me, the examples of Singapore is inspiring, although, you know, it is a different level of complexity institutionally. They've been doing that. They have a very close integration with the private sector in several of the policy and regulations that they do. So there is a very specific cultural context there. But I do think that it gives gives a lesson in terms of what sandboxes can bring to the table. And for me, the key word there is, how do we allow this to be a space where we're building trust? And that, to your second question, is what are the lessons, right? And I think that's where we need more evidence in terms of what are the good practices for sandboxes, and how can we do this kind of study and mapping and doing an X-ray of the different sandbox experiences to understand what was their actual result. And what we have seen, and I mean, we have a large inventory of different sandboxes experiences around the world, not only around AI, but on different sectors. On AI, we have identified almost 20 different sandboxes today. But what's interesting here is that most of that information is not public, right? And if you've done research in the region, you'll see that as well. And there's very little information online. So how can we change that? How can we have a structured approach to how we're sharing information around sandboxes? How can we make this part of good practices? And when you actually develop and design your sandbox, that you are sure that you're going to report it? Is there a forum where you're actually reporting to? Right now, in the context of the AI Act, designing a sandbox is not just a nice thing to have, it's a requirement, right? All the countries within the EU will have to develop their own AI sandbox and report on it to the European Commission, to the AI authority. What's going to happen in Latin America then? How are we going to coordinate this? Is there a space where we actually can share those experiences and good practices and build on each other's to understand how to set up better governance for sandboxes themselves, how to actually create spaces where you are consulting on sandbox, where you have an assessment framework for sandbox itself? How are you mitigating risks within sandbox as well? And what happens when it fails? Everyone's very happy when sandboxes go right, right? I mean, auditors are not very happy when it doesn't. And so who's going to be accountable for that? And are we going to build lessons learned from those failures as well that can be very informative? And for me, that needs to be more structured. And that's why we're on a mission to actually build that space. Next week, we're going to have the inaugural meeting of the Global Sandboxes Forum. And what this space aims to create, it's a community of practice of practitioners around sandboxes. It's a space where we can share resources, capacity building, good practices around sandboxes as well, and where we can hopefully structure how to improve sandboxes and how to evaluate them as well, so that we can build on the good practices of what has already been established, and also to prepare for what's coming next in terms of challenges. But more effort, more resources need to be done to being put in there. I invite you to join our events. You can share it. You can see it in our website, datasphere.org, in the part of events, and here we see more information around it. You're invited. I think it's wonderful to be able to be talking to this particular audience around it. We need more data protection experts and data and AI experts to be around the room. But I do think that much more needs to be done so that we actually make the most of the potential.
Thank you, Lorraine. I'll pass now to Lucia.
I'll be mindful of our time. Retomo en una lección que al tiempo es un riesgo. En el informe que hicimos en Derechos Digitales vimos la experiencia de Francia, Noruega, España, que está desplegando su sandbox aplicando la ley de inteligencia artificial en Europa, así también como vimos la experiencia de Francia, Noruega, no sé si ya los mencioné. ¿Qué tienen en común todas estas experiencias en Europa? Y es la ausencia de análisis sobre el impacto de los sandboxes en la protección de los derechos humanos de las personas. Porque los sandboxes prometen a los innovadores acceder a un terreno seguro, de vigilancia, ¿no? De supervisión de la autoridad, pero también de acceso a usuarios de la vida real. Usuarios que con seguridad no saben que con ellos se está experimentando con una tecnología cuya seguridad, ¿no? O riesgos todavía no han sido probados, o de ellos no se ha generado evidencia. Luego, es un riesgo porque en América Latina, cuando vemos estos desarrollos para avanzar hacia la implementación de sandboxes y experiencias ya pasadas, como la de Colombia, vemos que los análisis desde la perspectiva de derechos humanos también están ausentes. Luego, urge, ¿no?, tener, digamos, esta perspectiva también sobre la mesa, porque si no vamos sin derechos humanos, yo creo que estamos hablando de una promesa vacía. Particularmente, de nuevo, porque lo que se busca al innovar en un espacio de juego seguro es permitir a innovadores tener, ¿no?, los datos de personas de carne y hueso reales. Luego, cuando las cosas salgan mal, ¿qué haremos con esos usuarios, ¿no?, que en principio no saben que están siendo parte de un entorno de prueba? Solo quisiera traer para ustedes una cita muy, muy concreta de una autora, solo una autora entre más de 100 textos revisados para la elaboración de este artículo en Derechos Digitales, hablaba de la importancia de considerar los derechos humanos al hablar de sandboxes. Y en inglés decía, quote unquote, "Regulatory sandboxes generated a lot of hype, but their effect is limited due to the small scale of tested products, services, business models. Furthermore, the strong human rights guarantees built into process hinder their experimental nature and decrease their attractiveness, which is primarily based on the lifting of certain legal restrictions during the participation in the sandboxes." Los derechos humanos para la promesa, digamos, de los sandboxes puede ser una limitación. Y si eso es así, vamos a tener que hablar muy en serio de si esta es una herramienta regulatoria, digamos, atractiva y en caso de que lo sea, cuáles son las valoraciones de necesidad, razonabilidad, legalidad en el medio.
Thank you, Lucia. We are on time. We have 5 minutes. I will understand 7. So I guess I'll open for some comments, not questions, because we won't have time for reactions here. But please go ahead, you, and then Thiago.
Do you see the technological competition and the regulatory race could be an obstacle to collaboration in sandboxes between countries?
Thank you. We will take notes to follow up after the panel. Thank you.
Okay, so, well, very quickly, but I couldn't not speak when the Brazilian case was discussed here. So I have been I have been leading the team that's working on the design. We're still in the design phase of our sandbox. So it's very interesting, and I'm looking forward to the report that you're going to publish, because I agree with you, Lucia. We are being cautious. And that's actually connect with your last intervention when you mentioned we have to be careful with human rights. And especially as a data protection authority, then we have to be double cautious because we are a human rights, a fundamental rights institution. Sometimes other regulatory agencies don't have them officially in their agenda. Of course, everyone's understand now that every regulator should care about human rights, but for Data Protection Authority, this is it's our role. So this is something to be careful, but this does not mean, in my opinion, that we should avoid experimenting, because what I keep saying and playing, I have told that to Lohane and other colleagues, we are still sandboxing sandboxes. And part of initiatives like the Global Sandbox Forum, I think is about that. Let's have different levels and experience of sandboxes, because we can grow maturity. And the Singapore example it's an excellent example. I think the UK as well. Now we have a digital coordination forum, like CC said. And this only happened because they allowed themselves to experiment. So their sandboxes have sandboxed several times, and now they have a bigger maturity. Okay, now we can try to have coordination because it's lacking. Now we don't need to be calling anyone to come, because the participants trust us and they want to come. So I agree with you. Maybe Latin America still will have some steps to go, but it's interesting to see that initiatives are coming, and I'm hopeful that maybe within 5-10 years, I don't know, but we'll have very nice examples, maybe Mercosur partnerships on Sandbox, or just independent collaboration. So let's hope for the best.
Since
Thank
I
you.
literally have the mic,
Thiago.
I would like to reinforce the invitation for the Global Sandbox Forum. There's a great panel on the afternoon exactly on that.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Felipe. I guess I started the conversation talking about the topic or the title of this panel, which puts human rights or innovation. I guess the take I would like to take from this conversation is that we cannot afford to sustain innovation and human rights as a dichotomy in Latin America. There was an element here that was not brought explicitly to the table, but which has to do with inequality precisely. And we are talking about global inequalities that we are trying to address. And I guess this space has been putting a lot of focus on that, on the G20 and the digital sovereignty and other sovereignty agendas. And we also have the local inequalities, because Latin America remains one of the most, or the most unequal region in the world. And when Jonathan talks about asymmetry, we are not talking only about informational asymmetry. We are talking about different levels of power asymmetries that affect our region. So I would really like to end this conversation with this reflection on sandboxing sandboxes, which I really like. And the idea that came out of several of your interventions in terms of what is the Latin American take on sandboxes? And this, I guess, Jonathan, you mentioned, Cici mentioned this in several times. How do we use this instrument as an instrument for collaboration and as an instrument for building trust, also as Lorraine was mentioning? I guess this was a very valuable panel, at least for me. As civil society organization, we are not often invited to several of this conversation, let's say, but we are putting ourselves into the table, and I guess this can be a great start of discussion for us to continue putting the different perspectives into dialogue, because I guess we can get into very interesting insight, which we are already hearing here and there in this room. Thank you so much. Thank you especially to Lorraine, DataSphere Initiative, for this last minute merge, which I guess worked very well. Thank you, Jonathan, Felipe, Lucia, also for all the work put into building this panel. And I guess we continue in the rooms. And thank you so much, Cici. Sorry for joining online and giving such valuable insight into this conversation. I guess we will continue in the room and hopefully continue to build other spaces to take this conversation on.